So, what really drives the growth, and sometimes the decline, of the human population? It's one of the biggest questions you can ask, a story that has defined our entire past and will absolutely shape our future. Today, we're going to dive into the powerful theories that try to explain it all.
I mean, just look around the world today. You've got some nations that are just booming with growth, while others are actually facing a future with fewer and fewer people. So what's going on here? Why the huge difference? Well, to even begin to answer that, we have to turn to the science of demography.
And that's where demography comes in. It's the whole field dedicated to understanding these massive patterns. You could say it's the science of us, how many we are, where we live, and where we're all headed. And over the years, some really powerful ideas have popped up to make sense of it, and they tend to fall into a couple of key camps.
Okay, so the first major group of theories looks at the most basic stuff imaginable, our biology and the food we eat. The core question they ask is, are our numbers ultimately controlled not by our choices, but by the raw, hard limits of nature itself?
And you absolutely cannot talk about population without starting with this guy, Thomas Malthus. Back in 1798, he published this essay that sent, and I mean this, shockwaves through the world, basically outlining a pretty grim future for all of us.
The core of Malthus's idea was both simple and powerful. He said, look, population, when you don't do anything to stop it, grows geometrically. It doubles, then doubles again and again. But our ability to grow food, that only grows arithmetically, one slow step at a time. You can see the problem right away. Eventually, the number of people is guaranteed to just completely outrun the food supply.
So, if that's the crisis, how does it get solved? Well, Malthus said it happens through two types of checks. On one hand, you have the preventive checks, things people do voluntarily, like getting married later. But he warned, if those don't work, nature has its own way, the positive checks. And those are things like famine, disease, and war that would just bring the population crashing back down. Of course, his biggest, most catastrophic predictions didn't happen, mostly because he couldn't have imagined the incredible leaps in farming technology that would totally change his food supply equation.
Malthus wasn't the only one thinking about food, though. Thomas Doubleday had this fascinating and totally counterintuitive idea. He basically said that poor nutrition actually boosts fertility. His theory was that when a species is threatened with scarcity, it goes into overdrive, reproducing more to ensure survival. Now, it's a super controversial idea for sure, but it just goes to show how central food was to all these early theories.
Okay, but what if we've been looking in the wrong place? What if the answer isn't just about biology, or what's on our plates? A whole other school of thought says the real drivers are social, our ambitions, our economies, and the personal choices we all make.
You've probably noticed this trend. As people get wealthier, they generally have fewer kids. But why? Well, one theory from Arsène Dumont is called social capillarity. It's the idea that ambition is the key. You have fewer kids so you can invest more in climbing that social ladder. But another thinker, Luigi Brentano, said, no, it's much simpler. Wealthy people just have more access to other fun things to do, other pleasures besides raising a big family.
This whole idea of choice gets a lot more formal, almost like a business decision with Harvey Leibenstein's theory. He saw the decision to have a child as a cost-benefit analysis. On one side, you've got the utility, the joy, the fun, maybe help with work, security when you're older. And on the other side, you've got the costs, the direct costs of raising them, sure, but also the lost income or opportunities for the parents. And as societies get richer, those costs tend to go up, while the economic benefits go down.
And then Karl Marx enters the chat. He came at this from a completely different universe. For Marx, Malthus and all these other guys had it totally wrong. The problem wasn't overpopulation, not at all. The problem was the economic system itself.
See, Marx argued that capitalism needs what he called a surplus pool of labor, basically unemployed people, to keep wages low for everyone else and keep profits high for the owners. So poverty and misery weren't because there were too many people for the amount of food. He said it was a built-in, necessary feature of the system. His solution? Change the system, and the so-called population problem just vanishes.
So, okay, we have theories about nature, and we have theories about society. But what if the real answer is both? That's the beautiful idea behind what is probably the most widely accepted framework we have today, the demographic transition model. It's awesome, because it weaves health, economics, and personal choice into one single, powerful story.
The model basically lays out this 5-stage journey that pretty much every society goes through. It kicks off in stage 1, where crazy high birth rates and equally high death rates pretty much cancel each other out. Then comes the population explosion of stage 2.
Growth slows down in stage 3, it stabilizes in stage 4, and finally, we get to the potential decline of stage 5, which is a reality for countries like Japan and Italy right now.
Now, stage 2, this is where things get really dramatic. This is the point where modern medicine, better sanitation, and more food cause the death rate to just plummet. But here's the key. Birth rates stay high because social customs and family sizes take a lot longer to change. And that massive gap that opens up between falling deaths and high births, that creates an absolute population boom.
And this whole transition completely reshapes a country's age structure. You can literally see it. In stage 2, you get this classic pyramid shape with a huge, wide base of young people. This tells you it's a society with massive growth ahead, but it also means there's incredible pressure to educate and find jobs for all those kids.
Then you fast forward to stage 4, and that pyramid has totally transformed. It's not a pyramid anymore. It's more like a column. Birth rates have finally dropped to match the low death rates, and that creates a stable population with all the age groups pretty much even. This is what most developed nations look like today.
And that brings us to the big modern challenge, stage 5. The pyramid starts to get top-heavy, almost flipping upside down. With birth rates falling below death rates, you end up with fewer young people than older people. And this creates some serious economic problems, right? Because you have a smaller and smaller workforce trying to support a bigger and bigger retired population.
Okay, so all of these theories are great at explaining how population changes, but it all leads to this final, really practical question. Is there an ideal number of people for a country? Can you actually calculate the perfect population size?
Well, that's exactly what the optimum population theory tries to do. It was developed by Edwin Cannon, and it sets a really clear, straightforward goal. The best population is simply the one that gives you the highest possible income per person. It's not about culture or happiness. It's a purely economic and pragmatic way of looking at things.
So this theory gives us 3 possible states. A country can be underpopulated, meaning it just doesn't have enough people to make the most of its resources. It can be overpopulated, where there are too many people, which strains everything and lowers the average income. Or it can hit that just right sweet spot, that optimum point, the perfect balance of people and resources for maximum prosperity.
So after all that, what's the answer? What drives population? It's pretty clear there's no single, simple driver. Instead, what we've seen is how our understanding has grown up. We started with the hard limits of food and nature, then we added the power of human choice and money, and finally, we brought it all together in this big, sweeping story of how societies develop.
You know, from the fears of Malthus to the complex economic models of today, every one of these theories is an attempt to map our collective human journey. They give us the backstory for the world we're all living in. But in the end, this massive story is written one person at a time, by individual lives. Your choices, your family, you're a part of it. So the final question is, what will explain your part in this incredible story?